On a sunny afternoon, two corrupt police officers target a young black woman, using their power to unjustly accuse her of a crime she didn't commit. They drag her out of her car with no explanation or apology, leaving her bruised and shaken. Just when the situation reaches its breaking point, an unexpected figure steps forward from the crowd, disrupting the whole scene. Who is this person, and why does their presence cause the officers to rethink their approach to justice? Before diving deeper into the story, drop a comment below and let us know where you're tuning in from. Jasmine, a 23-year-old with big dreams and a bright future, was heading home from a business meeting. She had worked hard to get where she was. Her degree, her job, everything seemed to be falling into place. But as she drove through the bustling streets, she had no idea that the course of her day was about to change dramatically. Out of nowhere, two police cars swerved behind her, their sirens blaring. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She knew she had done nothing wrong. She'd always been careful to follow the law. So why were they stopping her? The two white officers approached her car aggressively, accusing her of speeding when she hadn't been. She tried to explain herself, but they wouldn't listen. "Get out of the car, ma'am, now," one officer ordered sharply. "Why? What did I do?" Jasmine's voice trembled. Without answering, the officer yanked her out of the car and threw her to the ground. Panic surged in her chest as she realized the weight of racial profiling was bearing down on her. They didn't care to hear her side of the story. In the distance, the murmur of a crowd began to swell. People stood by, watching the scene unfold, some pulling out their phones to record, but none daring to step in. Just as the officers seemed ready to intensify their force, a voice rang out, clear and commanding. "Stop." It was a low, authoritative tone that caused everyone to freeze. The officers looked up, surprised, as they saw the figure standing just a few feet away. It was Dwayne Johnson, the famous actor and former wrestler. The crowd parted to make way for him as he walked toward the officers, his face set in a serious expression. Dwayne Johnson wasn't just a celebrity. He was known for his strong stance on justice. He had spoken out against racial injustice, inequality, and police violence many times before. But seeing it unfold right in front of him was different. He wouldn't let this go unchecked. Approaching the officers calmly, his presence was imposing. He made direct eye contact with one officer, who appeared momentarily thrown off by his sudden appearance. Dwayne's voice was measured, yet carried an undeniable authority. "Let her go." The officer paused, unsure how to respond to someone of Dwayne's stature. The crowd had grown larger, whispers circulating, phones still recording. But Dwayne wasn't concerned with the attention. He wanted the officers to understand the weight of their actions. One officer, still holding Jasmine by the shoulder, scoffed. She was resisting arrest, he claimed, though his tone lacked certainty. Dwayne's expression darkened. "Resisting? Are you serious?" His voice dropped to a low, almost inaudible growl, but the intensity in it hit like a punch. "I'm giving you one chance to let her go. If not, I'll take this to a much higher authority." The officer seemed to consider his options for a moment, but the crowd around them was growing more agitated, and the sight of Dwayne Johnson standing up for Jasmine was not something they could ignore. Without another word, the officer released Jasmine, who was trembling but trying to maintain her composure. She could hardly believe what had just happened. Was this really happening? Did Dwayne Johnson just intervene on her behalf? The officers, now visibly shaken by the presence of someone so influential, stepped back. They didn't dare challenge him further. Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest as she looked up at Dwayne, who smiled reassuringly. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft now, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. Jasmine nodded, too stunned to speak. She was grateful, but still processing everything that had just happened. The officers slowly walked back to their cars, clearly embarrassed. They knew they couldn't get away with what they had just done, especially with someone like Dwayne Johnson involved. The crowd had dispersed, but the energy in the air was still palpable. Jasmine turned to face Dwayne, still in shock. "Thank you," she finally whispered. "No need to thank me," Dwayne replied with a smile. "This shouldn't be happening in the first place. Nobody should ever be treated like that." As they stood there, police sirens began to wail in the distance, but this time they were heading elsewhere. Jasmine couldn't help but think about how quickly things could have escalated if Dwayne hadn't intervened. She had been powerless, just another victim of prejudice and systemic racism. But now, she felt like her voice had been heard, even if only for a brief moment. Dwayne glanced at the camera crews who had gathered, trying to capture the scene. "Make sure this gets out," he told one of the reporters. "Let people see what happens when the system fails. Let them know that we won't stand for it." The media would soon pick up the story, but Jasmine didn't care about the fame or the attention. She was just grateful to be alive, to have survived a situation that could have gone horribly wrong. Later that day, news outlets across the country ran stories about the incident. Jasmine's face appeared on TV, but what really captured the public's attention was the way Dwayne Johnson had stood up for her. His actions were a reminder that even in a world filled with injustice, there were still people who would fight for what's right. A few days passed, and the world seemed to be buzzing with reactions to the incident. Some people praised Dwayne for his bravery, while others criticized the officers for their overreach. Jasmine, however, remained quiet. She hadn't spoken to the media, and she had no intention of doing so. What mattered now was finding a way to heal from what had happened. One morning, as she was scrolling through her social media feed, she noticed something strange. The police officers who had assaulted her were now facing an internal investigation. There was talk of their suspension, and some even speculated they might lose their jobs. It seemed that their actions, while initially swept under the rug, had now caught the attention of those in power. But it wasn't just the investigation that caught Jasmine's eye. As she dug deeper, she found out that one of the officers had been involved in a similar incident years ago, a case that had been quietly dismissed. Karma had finally caught up with them. It was a strange feeling, knowing that justice was moving in her favor, even if slowly. Jasmine couldn't help but wonder if things would have been different if Dwayne hadn't stepped in. Would the officers have gotten away with it? Would she have become just another statistic? As the weeks went by, Jasmine found herself reflecting on the events that had unfolded. She had never expected to be caught in such a situation, but in a way it had changed her. She had been a victim, yes, but she had also witnessed the power of standing up for what's right. The incident had brought her closer to understanding the deep-seated issues that still plagued society. And as for Dwayne Johnson, he had kept his word. He had made sure the world knew what had happened, and his bold intervention had sparked a much-needed conversation about prejudice and racial profiling. The story wasn't over for Jasmine, but it had shifted her perspective. In the end, she knew that this experience wasn't just about what happened to her, but about what it meant for everyone who had ever been unjustly treated. The truth would always come to light, no matter how hard some tried to bury it. And sometimes, Karma had a way of making sure that justice, however imperfect, would eventually find its way. If you enjoyed the story of Jasmine and Dwayne Johnson's bold intervention, make sure to check out our next story that will surely captivate you. Click here to watch it.